Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Chris Brown is here with me. Chris, let's do some best and most interesting of the weekend before we get out of here. What do you got for
Let's do it.
me this weekend?
Yeah, so my best game, we got a really good, intriguing weekend of college
We
basketball when
do.
you have, um, just in terms of AP top 25 ranks, you have 14 at 18, 5 at 23, 2 at 17, and 9 at 4. Like, that's a pretty good weekend of games.
Yep.
Uh, I'm going with Iowa, Ohio State. Um, that's Sunday evening. Of course, these are two teams who we just talked about
Yeah.
earlier in the show, though, who came out on the losing end of a outcome we expected, but not necessarily by that margin, and an outcome we certainly didn't expect. So these are both teams that are right intriguing. Of course, Ohio State cannot afford um, another loss from the perspective of trying to keep that fourth number one seed like we talked about.
Yep.
Uh, Iowa, meanwhile, they're right. This isn't a game that's all of a sudden going to like change their overall picture, but they're trying to get back on track, if you will, after what happened against Michigan. Of course, not that they were expected to win that game, but this is
Mm-hmm.
just these are two high level teams who I want to see how they fare against each other because we're coming down the stretch here, and these games we're sort of entering the period where I look at the momentum that teams have down the stretch. I look at how they're performing here in the final couple games before their conference tournaments,
Mm-hmm.
because that's when it starts to take on more meaning that like this could be the beginning of momentum for a team,
Yep.
or the big what we look back at and say, some of the that it could be a troublesome loss and a bad performance, and something we look back and say, oh, we should have seen this. So these are sort of the games I start to put that extra weight on. So I'm intrigued by Iowa Baylor as my best matchup of the weekend. How about you?
Yeah, I think real quick, I think I want to see Iowa go toe to toe with a good team and beat them. They haven't done it yet this season.
Right. No.
I mean, we go back to the beginning of the year. You lose to Gonzaga. Um, the next chance you get is against Illinois. You lose that one. Ohio State,
Yeah.
you lose that one. Um, they did get a win at Wisconsin, but Wisconsin just not inspiring. And then you lose to Michigan, and you don't lose. It's not particularly close. I want to
Mm-hmm.
see Iowa win one of these basketball games, and
Yeah.
on the road at Ohio State is probably not the place to try and get that done, but nonetheless, a big one. I went with Kansas and Baylor
Yeah, that's my most interesting. Yeah.
because I think Baylor's going to lose at some point before the NCAA tournament. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
know when,
Yeah.
and it could very well be on Saturday. Kansas is
Mm-hmm.
playing some of the best basketball they played all season. Baylor has played, once, right? They had a bunch of games postponed. They played Iowa State. They didn't look good. And then they had their game against West Virginia canceled because the Big 12 is trying to essentially get all of these, get games in, but make sure, teams aren't playing a bunch of games on the road or a bunch of games at home. And so as a result, that West Virginia game was canceled. They do get West Virginia after this Kansas game, but at Kansas, I think this one will be significantly closer than the one that we saw in Waco.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just an 8-point loss for Kansas, but it was clear that Baylor was the better team in that game. I'm very, very intrigued by this matchup. And I think, Kansas is still a team that I don't want any part of at any point in the season. Um,
Right.
and I don't think Baylor wants any part of them at home, in Fog Allen Fieldhouse right now. I think it's going to be a great game, and so that's what I went with.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you. You know, Baylor, of course, um, they came back from their like 3 week pause against Iowa State, and there was plenty of rust in the first half. They had to come back from a 17-point deficit,
Mm-hmm.
which obviously you gonna give credit to the Bears for doing, but also it's not a game they would have been able to come back in if their opponent wasn't Iowa State. Um, not that them, coming back with a loss or anything. I'm like there are a few things that Baylor could do that are actually going to change my overall view of them.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, I'm interested to see how do they look in game two back. I mean, it's probably going to be fine. I mean, I probably there's probably not going to be rust anymore just because right? This is a team that it's understandable that the first half of their first game back after 3 weeks off, like that's completely understandable. I don't really have any reason to think that there's going to be continued rust, but right, we talked about Kansas on Monday. I'm right there with you. They lost to Texas, but it was at Texas. It was in overtime. It doesn't change my opinion about the kind of basketball that they're playing right now, and I think this is going to be a really interesting one. So yeah, that was my most interesting game.
For me, the most interesting game, I just looking at some of the teams that are on the bubble. Florida State at North Carolina. North Carolina could really help themselves with a win against Florida State. They get them in the Dean Dome. That's a winnable basketball game, and I think one that North Carolina needs to win, especially after they put Marquette on the schedule, and then Marquette subsequently comes into the Dean Dome and beats them. They pretty much need that win now, so I'm interested in that one. Xavier also on the bubble. They get Creighton at home in the Cintas Center. That one's interesting as well. What does that would give them a boost in the right direction? Xavier just 12-5 this season. They haven't gotten a chance to play a ton. They've only played 10 Big East games. For comparison, Creighton is 13-4 in the Big East. They've played 17 Big East games. So Xavier hit pretty hard by COVID and some other things. So they're a little bit behind the eight ball there. Duke at home against Louisville. I think we're looking at a Duke team that their path to getting into the tournament is pretty clear, but it starts with beating Louisville at home on Saturday, so I'm looking at that one as well. There are a lot of interesting games this weekend due to the bubble, right? We're getting down to the last week of the regular season, and there's a lot going on here that could shake up what we actually see and the names that we actually see called a couple Sundays from now.
Yeah, I mean, the combination of games of top tier teams that are going to be in the tournament regardless, that we just want to see how they measure up against each other, the combination of that and the number of games, like you said, with bubble teams that maybe it's their last chance to get a real impact win, or maybe it's we're getting into must-win territory for some of those clubs on the bubble, teams on the bubble. So you combine those two together and, you could probably watch a whole weekend's worth of 8 or 10 games of real games that you feel like are going to have consequences moving forward. So it's going to be a good weekend.
It is for sure. Thank you for joining us here on a Friday here at 110 Daily. We'll be back on Monday to discuss everything that happened over the weekend in the college basketball world. We'll do some winners and losers, and we'll get it rolling for next week. Josh will be back on Monday as well. Take care of yourselves this weekend. Take care of each other. Watch some basketball, and we will talk to you again on Monday.